Nobody wanted what the old cowboy left behind. Not the bank, not his own blood, not the buyers who drove out in air-conditioned trucks, looked at 400 acres of cracked dust and a windmill that hadn't turned in years, and drove off shaking their heads. Worthless, they said, let the county take it. But there was one who wouldn't leave. One who stood guard over a patch of dead ground in 106-degree heat, teeth bared at anyone who came close, refusing to move even for food, even for water, even for kindness. A dog. And that dog knew something that $10 million couldn't buy, something the old man had spent 40 years hiding, something he tried to tell everyone before he died, and nobody ever stopped long enough to listen. I was the one who finally listened. My name's Del Hoyt, and I'm going to tell you exactly what that dog was guarding and what it cost me to find out. Stay with me, because the part that broke my heart isn't the money. It's what the money was standing on top of. That's the first thing I need you to understand, because it's where everything starts. Not with a will, not with a map, not with the $10 million everybody keeps asking me about. It starts with a blue heeler the color of wood smoke, planted between Amos Fenn's cooling front porch and two men from the county, showing them every tooth God gave her and inventing a few more. I came up the road because I'd seen the coroner's van kicking dust 2 miles off, and out here you learn to read dust the way city folks read a phone. A slow plume means somebody's lost. I keep a ledger, always have, 40 years of it. Every calf and every debt and every rain in a leather book my wife used to laugh at. And I remember I had the pencil still behind my ear when I climbed out of my truck into that furnace of an afternoon and saw the whole miserable picture at once. Amos on the porch under a sheet. 2 young fellows in county shirts backed up against the van. And Cinder. I didn't know her name yet. I'd see it later, burned into a scrap of harness leather in a drawer. In Amos's shaky hand, Cinder, be 2019, like he'd written down the birth of a child. Right then she was just a snarling gray shape guarding a dead man, and one of the county boys had a catch pole out, one of those loops on an aluminum stick, and he was working up the nerve to use it. Don't, I said. He looked at me like I'd fallen out of the sky. Sir, she won't let us near the deceased. We got a job to. I know whose place this is. I walked up slow, hands open. Give me a minute. Here's a thing about me you should know early. I'm not brave. 63 years old, bad knee, worse back, and a heart that skips when I climb the loading chute. I count things when I'm scared, fence posts, heartbeats, the change in my pocket. It's a habit my mother gave me and death never broke me of. Standing in Amos Fenn's yard, I counted the boards on his porch step. 3. Warped, gray, one of them split down the middle. I counted them twice while that dog decided whether to trust me. Hey girl, I said soft, hey now. Cinder didn't stop growling, but her eyes flicked to me a fast, exhausted glance, and I saw what 40 years of animals had taught me to see. She wasn't guarding out of meanness. She was guarding because she didn't know what else to do. She'd been standing there, I found out later, since sometime the night before. 10, 12 hours in that heat. Her tongue was a dry gray thing. Her ribs went in and out like a broke accordion. She was dying to protect a man who was already gone. I got down on one knee, the good one, and I didn't reach for her. I just stayed there low, the way you do with something that's decided the whole world is a threat. You did good, I told her. You hear me? You did real good. Nobody's mad at you. And I don't know why those were the words. They just came. Maybe because they were the ones I'd wanted somebody to say to me the day I found my Ellen in the garden with her trowel still in her hand and her heart already stopped. You did good. Nobody's mad at you. Fool words. But the dog's ears came up half an inch, and that half inch was the crack in the door. It took 20 minutes. I'm not going to pretend it was a movie. She let me get close, and then she didn't, and then she did again. And finally she let me put my hand flat on the boards near her paw and leave it there. When the county boys finally carried Amos to the van, she followed to the edge of the porch and then stopped, like there was a wall only she could see, and she watched them slide him in and shut the doors, and she made a sound I have heard maybe twice in my life from an animal. It's not a howl. I don't have a word for it. It's the sound of something breaking that doesn't have the words to break out loud. I wrote 3 things in my ledger that night, at my own kitchen table, with a glass of whiskey I didn't drink. Amos Fenn, D. Approx. July 19. Dog blue heeler, alive. Nobody came. That last one is the part that ate at me. Because in the days after, I learned who Amos Fenn had been to the rest of the world, and it was nothing. Less than nothing. He was the crazy old man on the ledge road, the one who'd let 400 acres go to ruin, who hadn't run cattle in a decade, who drove a truck older than the county boy with the catch pole, and paid for his groceries in exact change counted out slow while the line built up behind him. People had opinions about Amos Fenn the way they have opinions about weather, casual, unkind, and mostly wrong. The prevailing theory at the feed store was that he'd been sitting on money and buried it in coffee cans out of pure spite, so nobody could have it. The other theory was that he had nothing at all and had simply been too proud to say so. Both theories, I'd come to learn, were exactly half right in a way that would have made Amos laugh. His only living relative showed up on the 4th day. I know because I'd taken to driving over each morning to leave water and food for Cinder, who could not be moved off that ranch. I tried. I brought her to my place the first night in the cab of my truck, and by 3 in the morning she'd chewed through a window screen, and I found her the next day back at Amos's porch, sitting in the exact spot, waiting. So I quit fighting it. I brought the water to her. And on the 4th morning there was a big clean pickup in the yard, the kind with a crew cab and a chrome grille and not one speck of real dirt on it, and a man in new boots standing with his hands on his hips looking at the property the way you'd look at a stain. "You the neighbor?" he called out. "I'm a neighbor," I said, "Del Hoyt." "Garrett Fenn." He didn't offer a hand. Amos was my uncle, great-uncle technically. He said technically like it cost him something to be related at all. "You know anything about this dump?" I looked at the dump. The house Amos built with his own hands, the barn leaning like a tired man, the dead windmill, and past all of it 400 acres of what did look, I'll be honest with you, like the surface of the moon, bleached grass, cracked earth, mesquite gone gray. We were 3 years into the worst drought anybody living could remember. Wells were going dry all up and down the valley. My own herd was half what it should be because I couldn't water them. The whole country was turning to bone. "It's land," I said. Garrett snorted. "It's a tax bill. I already had a guy out." He nodded at the acreage. "Nothing here. No mineral rights that show, no water table worth pumping, soil's shot. Best case I get somebody to take it for the dirt and I walk away even." He pulled out his phone, checked it, put it back. Everything about him was in a hurry to be somewhere else. "I mostly came for whatever's in the house. Old guy like that, you never know. He got any guns, coins, that truck run." I felt something go hard and quiet in my chest. "There's a dog," I said. He followed my eyes to the porch, where Cinder sat watching us with those pale, wary eyes, and his face did a thing I didn't like. "Yeah, animal control's coming Thursday for that. Can't sell a place with a mean dog on it." He shrugged like he was talking about hauling off a broken washing machine. "She bite you yet?" "No," I said. "She'll bite somebody, then it's a whole thing." He was already walking toward the house. "You mind? I want to look inside before the light goes." I minded. I minded more than I could have told you why. But I followed him up onto that porch past Cinder, who let me pass and stiffened at him. And I stood in the doorway of a dead man's house while his great-nephew went through it like a man at a yard sale. I want to tell you about that house, because it's where the second piece falls into place. It was poor. I won't dress it up. 1 room downstairs, a wood stove, a bed, a table with 2 chairs, though I never once saw a second person out there. But it was clean, swept. The blankets squared off on the bed like a barracks, and on every flat surface, in coffee cans and jelly jars and a cracked sugar bowl, there were rocks. Stones, ordinary looking, most of them. some pale, some rust-colored, some with a green vein running through. Amos had labeled each one in that shaky pencil hand, little strips of masking tape on the bottoms. North fence 4FT, dry wash upper. Behind the windmill same as 84. Dozens of them, hundreds maybe. Garrett picked one up, turned it over, read the tape, and laughed. Look at this. Old man was collecting gravel. He set it down without care and it rolled and knocked two others off the shelf and he didn't pick them up. Definitely lost his mind at the end, explains the dog. I bent down and picked the fallen stones up myself. I don't know why. It felt wrong to leave them on the floor. And as I set them back on the shelf, I read the tape on one of them and it said, "Where the water comes back." I didn't understand it. Not then. I put it back with the others and I got Garrett out of that house before he could pocket anything, and I drove home, and I fed my own thirsty cattle from a tank that was 3/4 empty, and I did not think about that stone again for 2 days. I should have thought about it sooner. Because Cinder already knew. Here's the part where you'll think I'm making it up. I'm not. I keep a ledger, I don't keep a fiction. The thing about Cinder was, she wouldn't stay on the porch. Every morning when I came with the water, she'd be waiting, but not in the same spot. Some mornings she was at the porch, but more and more she was out there. Out past the dead windmill, at the far northwest corner of the property where the ground dropped into a shallow dry wash, and she'd be digging, or standing over a hole she'd dug, or just lying next to it, panting, guarding a patch of cracked dirt the same way she'd guarded Amos's body. The first time I saw it, I figured she'd smelled a gopher. The second time I figured she was confused, grieving, an animal doing animal things. By the fourth time, I was standing at the edge of that wash with my water jug in my hand, watching a starving healer drag her paws through iron-hard clay, and something cold walked up my spine. She wasn't digging like a dog after a rabbit. Rabbit digging is frantic all over the place. This was placed. She'd dig and stop and put her nose down and move 6 inches and dig again, like she was following a line only she could smell. And every single hole she dug was along the same invisible seam, curving down through the wash and off toward the windmill. I got down and put my hand in one of her holes. The dirt at the bottom was cool. Not cold, but cooler than the baked hell of everything around it. Cooler than dirt has any business being in July, 3 years into a drought, when there wasn't a drop of moisture for 40 feet down according to every well driller in the county. I remembered the stone, where the water comes back. I stood up too fast and my bad knee nearly put me on the ground, and Cinder looked up at me from her hole with dirt on her nose and her chest heaving, and I swear before God she looked at me like she was waiting. Like she'd been waiting 4 days for the one dumb human slow enough to finally catch up. "What is it, girl?" I said out loud like an idiot to a dog. "What did he show you?" That's when I heard the truck on the road. And that's when I met Roman Casa, and learned that I wasn't the only one who'd loved Amos Fenn, and that I was, in fact, very nearly the last to understand what he'd left behind. The truck was as old as Amos's. It pulled up along the wash and a man got out, maybe 70, moving slow and easy, a straw hat gone soft with years and a face like the country itself, deep lines, brown, weathered still. He looked at me, and then he looked at Cinder standing over her hole, and his whole face changed, not to surprise, to grief, and to something that looked strangely like relief. "So she found it," he said quietly. "Good girl, good girl." And Cinder, who had bitten at the air by the county men, who had let me near only after 20 minutes on my knees, walked straight to this stranger and pushed her whole head into his hands like she was coming home. "You knew Amos," I said. "It wasn't a question." 41 years. He crouched slow and let Cinder lean her weight against him. "Roman Casa, my people are San Carlos Apache. Amos and me, we ran water lines together back when this valley still had water to line." He looked out over the dead acres, and I understood suddenly that he wasn't seeing what Garrett saw, or what the buyers saw, or what I'd half seen. He was seeing something under it. "You're the neighbor been bringing her water." Del Hoyt. I know who you are. Amos talked about you, a ghost of a smile. Said you were the only man on this road who paid attention to your own reign. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said the true thing. I don't understand what's happening here. The dog, the holes. There's a stone in the house that says where the water comes back. Roman, the county says there's no water on this land. The buyers said the same. Garrett's already. Garrett? Roman's voice didn't change, but something behind it did. Garrett wants to sell it fast because Garrett had a man out here who tested for the water everybody's supposed to have. The shallow table, the one that's gone dry all up and down this valley. He put his hand flat on the cool dirt at the bottom of Cinder's hole, the same place I'd put mine, and he closed his eyes for a second like he was listening through his palm. That's not the water Amos found, he said. The sun was starting to slide and the light had gone the color of a bruise, and I stood at the edge of a dead man's dry wash next to an Apache elder and a starving dog, and I felt the whole shape of the last 4 days finally start to turn toward me like a face. Then what did he find? I asked. Roman looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked down at Cinder, who had gone still, her ears pricked toward the windmill, toward the deep seam of cool ground she'd spent 4 days trying to show a world that wouldn't stop to look. He found it in 1984, Roman said. It took him the rest of his life to prove it, and there's a box under that windmill dell that he told me if anything ever happened to him, I was to open with a witness present. He stood, joints cracking, and settled the soft hat on his head. You keep a book, they say. You write things down. I do. Then you're the witness. He whistled low and Cinder rose. Come back tomorrow at first light before the heat. Bring your book. He started toward his truck and then he stopped, and without turning around he said the thing that kept me up the whole night. That land Garrett's calling worthless, that everybody's stepped over for 40 years. He opened his truck door. There's men who'd pay $10 million for what's under it, and Amos knew it, and he'd rather have died out here alone with his dog than let the wrong ones have it. The door shut, the old engine caught, and I stood in the dark with a healer leaning against my leg, both of us looking at a windmill that hadn't turned in years, and I understood that tomorrow I was going to find out what a man like Amos Fenn considered worth more than his own life. I just didn't know yet that I'd have to decide what it was worth to me. First light out here doesn't arrive. It seeps, gray coming up out of the ground before the sun clears the ridge, everything colorless and cool for the one honest hour before the heat starts its killing. Cinder met me at the wash. She wasn't digging anymore. She was sitting by the windmill, facing it, calm now, the way a dog gets calm when the thing it's been trying to tell you is finally about to be understood. I had my ledger under my arm and a spade in the truck bed and a whole night's worth of arithmetic in my head, none of it adding up. $10 million. I'd said the number out loud in my kitchen at 2 in the morning just to hear how stupid it sounded in a house like mine. Roman came at gray. He brought a second man I didn't know, younger, 40s, a soft leather folder under his arm and reading glasses pushed up on his head. Tomás Reyes, Roman said. Water lawyer. Amos's water lawyer, though God knows Amos couldn't pay him half of what he was worth. Reyes shook my hand, and his grip was the grip of a man who already knew everything I was about to learn and was braced for how it would hit me. Mr. Casa says you're the witness, Reyes said. You understand what that means? No, I said honestly. It means when this is over, you'll have signed a paper saying what was in the ground and who found it and in what condition. It means when Garrett Fenn's lawyer comes, and he will come, you're the man who was here. He looked at me over the glasses. You still want to be that man? I looked at Cinder. She looked back at me with those pale, patient eyes. Show me, I said. The box was under the windmill's base, in a dry stone-lined chamber Amos had built himself, and covered with a slab you'd never find unless you knew to look, or unless a dog spent 4 days trying to dig a line straight to it. It took the 3 of us the better part of an hour to shift the slab. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed in a surplus ammunition can against the damp, was a bundle of papers, a hand-drawn geological map so detailed it looked printed, and a leather journal. And there was a letter on top, with one word on the outside in that shaky pencil hand. Witness. Ray's handed it to me. He wrote that 6 weeks ago. He knew his heart was going. He wouldn't see a doctor. Roman made a low sound at that, an old, familiar grief. Read it out loud, Mr. Hoyt, that's what he wanted. Read it to the dog if you have to, but read it out loud. So I did. My voice cracked on the second line and I didn't care. To whoever finally stopped. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're standing where I stood in the spring of 1984 when I watched the ground drink a whole thunderstorm and give none of it back. Everybody said this land was dead. I knew it wasn't. Dead land doesn't drink like that. Something was down there taking the water. It took me 19 years to find the fault. It runs northwest to southeast, under the windmill, under the wash. It's a fracture in the bedrock, and it feeds a deep aquifer that doesn't touch the shallow table everybody tests. Confined. Old water. Snowmelt from 100 years of mountains, held in the rock like money in a mattress. The drillers never found it because they never drilled deep enough, and they never drilled deep enough because everybody already knew there was nothing here. Knowing is the enemy of finding. Write that down, witness. It's the truest thing I learned. Tamaz can tell you what it's worth. In a wet year, nothing. In this drought, everything. There's people who would drain it dry in 10 years and move on. There's a data company wanted it for cooling. An almond operation out of the valley. A city, even. They offered me money I couldn't count. I said no to all of them and they called me crazy, and maybe I am. Because here's what they don't understand and what you have to. This water isn't mine. It was here before the fens, before the ranch, before the county drew its lines. Roman's people knew this spring when it still came to the surface, before the ranchers before me pumped the shallow water down and dropped the whole valley table and buried it. It's the last of the old water, the clean water, the water that comes back. If you sell it to the drainers, you'll be rich. And in 10 years, this valley will be a bowl of dust with a swimming pool in the middle of it. If you protect it, you'll be poor, and it'll still be here when your grandchildren are thirsty. I couldn't make that choice for you. I could only keep it safe long enough to hand it to somebody who'd stop long enough to think about it. That's why I couldn't tell just anybody. That's why I told the dog. She'd only ever take it to somebody who came back, who kept coming back. You came back. I'm sorry it's a burden. It was mine for 40 years and I never once set it down. But I slept out here every night with a healer and a sky full of stars over the cleanest water in 3 counties. And I want you to know, whoever you are, I was not a lonely man. I was a rich one, just not the way they meant. Take care of her, she's the best of us. Amos Fenn. I stopped reading, I had to. There is a particular kind of silence that comes after a dead man tells you the truth, and it filled that dry wash so completely that I could hear Cinder's breathing, and the tick of the cooling truck, and the tiny dry rasp of Roman Casa wiping his eyes with the back of one old brown hand. He never told me it was the last old water, Roman said quietly. He just called it the good water, all those years. He looked out over the dead acres, and I finally, fully saw them the way he did, not as ruin, but as a thing standing guard over a treasure, 400 acres of deliberate poverty hiding the richest ground in the county. My grandmother knew this spring. She said the earth here was still holding its breath. Amos was the first white man I ever met who believed her. Ray's cleared his throat, gently, the way a man does when he has to drag hope back to paperwork. I'll be plain with you, Mr. Hoyt, because Amos would want plain. The water rights here properly filed, and I have them here, filed and sealed, dated, defensible, are worth, conservatively in the current market, in the current drought, somewhere near $10 million to the right buyer. He let that sit. Amos left the land and these rights and the dog to you. The world went sideways. To me, he never met me. He knew of you, Mr. Cass's account and his own eyes. Ray's almost smiled. And the dog chose you, which to Amos was the only credential that mattered. There's a codicil, it's unusual. It'll survive a challenge, but Garrett will challenge it, so I need you to understand what you're accepting before you accept it. He handed me a single page. You inherit everything, free to sell. But the codicil requests, it can't legally require, but it requests that any sale of the water go to a conservation trust at a fraction of market value, with the aquifer protected in perpetuity. He's asking you to turn down roughly $9.5 million, Mr. Hoyt, and you are under no legal obligation to honor it. That's the whole cruelty of it. He made it a choice. I want to tell you, I didn't hesitate. I'd be lying. I stood in that wash with the letter in one hand and the codicil in the other, and I did the arithmetic I'd been doing all night, except now it was real. $10 million. I'm 63 with a failing herd and a mortgage on ground I've bled into for 4 decades, and a tank that's 3/4 empty and a wife 8 years in the ground whose headstone I bought on a payment plan. $10 million would fix every single thing that has ever gone wrong in my life. It would fix things that went wrong before I was born. And all I had to do was let some data company or some city or some almond baron pump the last old water out of the ground, until the valley I've lived in my whole life turned to the dust Amos said it would. I thought about my own cattle, thirsty right now, 2 miles away. I thought about a swimming pool in the middle of a bowl of dust. I thought about a man who slept 40 years next to a dog under clean stars and called himself rich. And here is the morally heavy thing, the thing I've never told anybody straight until now. For about 90 seconds standing there, I decided to sell it. I did. I made the choice. I thought, Amos, I'm sorry, but you were a crazy old man who died alone and poor, and I'm a practical man who is going to be warm and safe in my last years, and the water will run out someday anyway, and I'll take the 10 million. I had the words half-formed to say to raise. And then Cinder got up. She got up off the cool ground she'd guarded for 5 days, and she walked over to me, slow, tired, and she leaned her whole weight against my bad leg the way she'd leaned against Roman, the way she must have leaned against Amos 10,000 nights, and she looked up at me with those pale eyes. You came back, the letter said. She'd only take it to somebody who came back. And I understood that Amos hadn't left me the water. He'd left me the choice, and he'd left me the dog to make sure I made it as the man who kept coming back, and not the man who came once for the money. I closed the codicil. Write it down, Tomaz, I said, and my voice came out rough as the ground. Put it to the trust, all of it, Amos's terms. I had to stop and breathe. I'll keep the house, I'll keep the dog, I don't need the rest. Roman Casa put his hand on my shoulder, and he didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say, and that was the loudest thank you I have ever received in my life. Garrett challenged it, of course. Sat across a conference table from me in his clean boots and told me I was insane, that I was throwing away a fortune that should have been his blood's, that no jury would believe a man turned down $10 million for a dog and a dead stranger's guilt trip. He was half right, it wasn't guilt. The trust holds the water now. The aquifer's protected in perpetuity, which is a lawyer's way of saying forever, which is a longer word than most people are brave enough to plan for. In wet years it does nothing. But this valley's not going to see many wet years, and when the shallow wells fail, and they're failing, one by one, up and down the ledge road, there's a spring under a dead windmill that'll come back to the surface, clean and cold, old snowmelt from mountains that were white before any of us were born, and it'll water the people who are left when the drainers have moved on to drain somewhere else. I go out there most evenings. I keep the house up. I fixed the windmill, took me a month, but it turns now, and the sound of it turning is the sound of Amos not being entirely gone. I sit on the 3 warped porch boards and I do my arithmetic in the ledger, calves and rain and debts, and I'm as poor as I ever was, poorer, and I sleep out there sometimes under a sky so full of stars it doesn't seem possible, next to a blue healer the color of wood smoke. And I understand now what he meant. I was not a lonely man out there, I was a rich one. Just not the way they meant. Cinder's getting gray around the muzzle. She still walks the seam of the old water some mornings, nose down, checking the line, guarding the thing she guarded for the only man who ever believed her, and now for the second one, the slow one, the one who finally stopped. Last week she started digging again, a new spot closer to the ridge where none of us ever tested. I got down and put my hand in the hole. The dirt at the bottom was cool,